Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Paul Mackay from Analogue Wonderland, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Lomography's Babylon film, an ISO 13 black and white film that is a really interesting look versus a lot of options on the market today. Quick one before we get started. If you like film photography and want to see more videos like this one, film reviews, tips and tricks, that kind of thing, then please do make sure you're subscribed to our channel and notifications are turned on. Thank you so much. I feel like we're on a bit of a theme at the moment. So last week we had the Silberra Colour 50 and I talked about the Simon & Garfunkel song Kodachrome, and today we have Babylon, which is another very famous song from the last century. Today though, it is all about lomography, and from colour we move to black and white. Babylon is an ISO 13 black and white film, even though it does have a really lovely turquoisey look to the emulsion. Now, Lomography launched this a couple of years ago. It's one of their Kino films along with Berlin and Potsdam and Phantom, all at different ISOs, all giving slightly different looks. So it is a cinema film. Now, Lomography have actually sent me some beautiful marketing material, which I'm going to read out because I don't think I'll be able to memorize this perfectly. This is a romantic new addition to the Kino Film Family, and it delicately captures life's most emotive moments in glamorous grayscale, turquoise scale. Bare feet rest on crumpled sheets, conversations long forgotten echo an empty room. Clasped hands and honest faces resonate as they recall the memories that move them most, and blushing lovers weave their windswept tales of devotion. That is fantastic copy for a film, and is definitely evocative of movie magic for sure. I had images in my head from this. I mean, I think also for Wonderbox subscribers who are used to me sort of saying, let's challenge ourselves with what we should shoot, I think we should use that small bit of poetry as inspiration. Whether you choose to capture long forgotten echoes in empty rooms, whether you choose to capture blushing lovers, clasping hands, with or without the blushing lovers, I guess. Personally, I'm going to go with windswept tales of devotion. It's a particularly useful challenge. So what do we know about this film? So it's black and white, it's ISO 13, which is a slow film. Not as slow as the crazy ones we've had before, but still pretty slow, and possibly slower than your camera will be able to cope with. Normally, either if you have a point and shoot, it might only get down to about 100. If you have an old SLR or an old rangefinder, you might have a setting that is 25, maybe 12, that'd be close enough. Otherwise, we're back to our tricks and tips for shooting on low ISO, which is simply use an external light meter, so one on your phone. There are lots out there if you look for light meter app in the Google Store or the App Store on an iPhone. Use an external meter to work out what the shutter settings and aperture settings should be, and then try and compensate for that by finding a combination. So if you have a point and shoot that you know is f11, therefore your shutter speed needs to be quite long, use bulb mode. If you're using bulb mode, which is when you hold it down until you let go, then make sure you have a tripod, brace yourself against a wall or your elbow on a fence, anything like that will allow you to make sure you make the most of this. And you'll get really interesting effects, lovely smooth motion, capturing that windswept desolation that we talked about earlier. If you do have an SLR that has different lenses, then using the fastest lens you have, widest aperture, obviously will give you more options, more creative options for playing around with that shutter speed. But there you go. So that's obviously one thing to get out of the way. It'll help bright light, it'll help sunshine. If you try and shoot this in the dark or in the night time or in the evening or inside, you know that you're going to be talking about shutter speeds that are several seconds, maybe even more than 10, 30 seconds long, which will be really tricky to manage, but also a great creative option if you would like. Now, with it being ISO 13, it does promise low grain, very clear scans, very clean print, all of those lovely kind of things that we get to know from highly technical films. Now, the one thing that is worth calling out, and when you look through the customer reviews, a lot of people say, actually, this was quite a tricky film to get to grips with. This didn't give the results I'd like. The average score, I think, is 3 out of 5 star. Now, I don't think this is because it's a bad film per se. I think that this is definitely a trickier film than HP5 and Tri-X and all the standard black and white films, but not just because of its ISO. The ISO does make it more difficult, don't get me wrong. That insensitivity to light, that means you have to have a long shutter speed or a really wide open aperture or loads of light, does make it trickier, but not insurmountable. But what people are talking about when they say it didn't really perform as they wanted it to or hoped it would, is that they say that their negatives come back very flat. What that means is it doesn't have huge exposure latitude. It won't give you brilliant contrast. And if you do have some shadows that are underexposed, they'll just turn into blackness. You won't get lots of gorgeous detail in the shadows as you would with some of the more common Delta films, Tri-X films, T-Max, etc., those films that we know and love. So it is going to be much less forgiving than black and white films that you've known and used in the past. Think of it more as probably behaving like a slide film, and we know that slide films, you've got to be more careful with exposure. It won't give you the same latitude, and shadows, if you go past a certain point, turn into a muddy mess. So have that in mind. How can you account for that? Well, first of all, that's not a huge issue. That's a clear fact. That makes it difficult for it to be a point and shoot sort of film, either camera-wise but also situationally. If you just take it to a pub and take some photos, they're probably not going to be particularly brilliant. And this goes back to where this comes from. This is a cinema film. This is used to being used with lights that set up bright lights, shinier spotlight on a subject. And then perhaps this film is then more likely to give brilliant results when you use deliberate bright lights and shadows to effect, rather than trying to capture an everyday street scene. So while I joked earlier about using that poetry and that evocative language to capture image with this film, in reality I think what I will be doing with my Babylon 13 film is I will be setting it up with still lifes or with portraits. I need to convince, see if my wife will sit down and dedicate the time with me to this, and using a bit of deliberate lighting. Now that could be bright natural lighting next to a window on a very sunny day, or using a flashlight or the torch on the back of your phone, or a lamp that's very close to them. A bedside lamp, reading lamp, or a desk lamp would be very good for directional impact. I'm playing around with very deliberately the shadow play, the silhouette play, and the detail that you'll get. That's not a guarantee for great results. I haven't tried this myself yet. This is very much based on the theory, the sample photos that I've seen from Lomography and the very best ones I've seen on the internet, versus the customer reviews where fantastically talented photographers are saying this doesn't necessarily shine in those everyday situations. I'm gonna embrace that. I'm going to take it on as a challenge, and I'm going to think a lot more about lighting than I would have done with a lot of the films recently. And that's okay, this is part of the fun and games of it. And it might be we all look at it and we say this is a really tricky film, like slide film, that often is. But it's worth it when you can get this certain setup sorted, in which case that's fantastically useful for the community to know. So if you're a Wonderbox subscriber, then I would encourage you to embrace that and have a play. Let me know what you think. If you've shot it before and what I've said resonates, then let me know. If you've shot it before, you tried what I've just described and it didn't work for whatever reason, then again, please let us know. Offer any suggestions, offer any advice to us so that we can all get better. But this is a truly excellent film. When I look at what is possible with it, it looks absolutely stunning. And I want to make sure that we all have the best possible chance of getting those results for ourselves and adding a very tricky technical film to our toolbox of emulsions that we love. That's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I will see you in a couple of weeks for the next review.